film students! In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about color and mise-en-scène. So you should have already read our pages for this week, and this is going to be a little bit more on those topics of color and mise-en-scène. So let me put the video to the side right here. And we start our lesson. Make this a little bit smaller. Voila. So, color and mise-en-scène. We start thinking about cinema as visual storytelling. I think what literature and cinema have in common is storytelling. And that's what we're going to focus on. And these are some elements of how directors tell us stories through their films. So, of course, as we're going to read on our pages for both color and mise-en-scène a little bit, we're going to learn about how colors are used to represent things, how they're used symbolically by directors. We're going to talk a little bit about warm versus cool colors and saturation and desaturation and the connections between color and emotions. Additionally, we'll talk a little bit about composition, which is mise-en-scène, what appears in front of the camera, how elements are arranged in the frame, and where characters are positioned. And this term is a French term. It means the placing on stage. So everything from the things that are placed in front of the camera to how the elements are placed in the frame and where characters are placed on that frame. So that's what we'll be talking about. So first, we start thinking about color and symbolism. And as we read in our reading, color is strongly emotional in its appeal. And one thing to note is the difference between warm colors and cool colors. So some examples of warm colors being, of course, red, yellow, and orange. And these colors suggest things such as aggressiveness, stimulation, passion. And of course, they tend to pop more or come forward in the image. Some examples that things that they can mean are things like fire, romance, and danger. We see those in these instances, these warm colors. So the cool colors, such as blue, green, and violet, they suggest tranquility, things are calm, aloof, and they tend to recede into the image. I often think of a image of like a lake, a shot of a lake, where it has these cool colors and it can recede into the image. No, there it is, water, or maybe an instance in the film of sadness or isolation, representing those feelings. I like this here, this little chart of some warm and cool colors. So, of course, as we saw in our reading, color symbolism is probably culturally acquired, though its implications are surprisingly similar in otherwise differing societies. So, of course, there's different meanings across cultures, but there are these implications of colors that survive across cultures, um, and this is what filmmakers use to communicate meaning through their deliberate choices of colors. So, even though red doesn't automatically mean danger, but we've learned this association as an example. And filmmakers understand this, that colors mean things for us. They make us feel a certain way, so they're intentional with their choices. Now, something else to note are saturated colors versus desaturated colors. When we talk about saturation, we're referencing just how vibrant or intense a color appears. So for the saturated colors, we have colors that are bright, vivid, intense. Often we see that in things like fantasies and romances and musicals. And additionally, they can suggest heightened emotion or artificial worlds. So whenever a character goes off into their artificial world of maybe daydreaming, sometimes we might see saturated colors. So with the desaturated colors, as opposed to them being bright or vivid or intense, they're known to be washed out or muted or pale. Think of instances like war films when there's a flashback, or a drama where the situation is more somber, right? Can suggest depression, trauma, or a harsh reality. So think about that. Consider whether they're saturated or desaturated colors, and what what is the filmmaker trying to get us to feel in that scene. So, for example, in this film, Age of Innocence, they use these saturated colors to reflect the film's repressed society. So, think about that. Is the director using saturated colors or desaturated colors? So, we talk about a little bit more of warm versus cool. And here's a good example. In the final scene in this film called um, London Rain. Sorry, it's not called London Rain. It's called Four Weddings and a Funeral. I thought that was a little off, but they end up in London, and it's dreary and it's gray, and the director did this to avoid sentimentality. So um, this final scene was very intentional, and um, the director wanted to avoid the sentimentality of more warm colors, where of course the effect would have been different if it was seen like in a golden light, right? So think about that. Now we talk more about mise en scène, which was everything that the director does in terms of placement within the frame. So how the actors are positioned and moved, and what is there, what we see in the frame, and how it's positioned, right? So that's all intentional. Uh, just like in photography, when photographers are intentional with how they're going to place things within the frame, and what they'll place and where, and that's what mise en scène is. So um, that's not only the characters, but think about the setting and the decor, like props and costumes. So everything you see in the frame is a choice. So the director, within the frame, chooses what we see and what we don't see. They're able to isolate subjects and making us focus on specific details. So it's all composition that creates meaning. And I like this part from our reading. The sensitive director is just as concerned with what's left out of the frame as with what's included. Because when something is left out, it leaves our imagination to run wild, right? And to think about what is absent in the frame. So even that has an effect upon us as the viewer. So something that directors do with their frames is that they view it in a 3 by 3 grid. It's called the rule of thirds. So when they're framing subjects, we need to think of it in reference to this 3 by 3 frame. So in this case, the subject is a little bit more to the side, right? To the left. So frame position matters. And where something is placed can suggest meaning. So, for example, when something is placed at the center, right, here's that 3 by 3 grid, then that is where we expect, you know, the most important elements to be seen. That suggests stability, balance, importance. And so, and it's also where our eyes naturally go first, right? When something, a subject is placed at the top, that suggests power, authority, or aspiration, right? For power. Characters placed here seem to control what's below. I think of films where maybe the employee is with the boss, and the boss is always like at the top of the frame because that boss has power and authority in that instance. Now, conversely, the bottom of the frame suggests vulnerability, powerlessness, subservience, and characters placed here seem in danger of disappearing from both the frame and figuratively, right? So that's very interesting. So think about where something is placed as we're watching films, right? So not only the colors, but also their placement. And even that has meaning. So we talk about edge framing. We talk about the left and right edges. And such as we see here for this shot from The Sixth Sense, when we see subjects on the left and right, this suggests insignificance, marginalization. Characters placed here are close to the darkness outside of the frame, can symbolize the unknown, isolation, anonymity. And in this instance, very much is creating tension, as we can see um, a sense of, you know, having that powerlessness in this instance. The unknown, I like that here. Literally, our this character is feeling scared, right, from the unknown. Uh, in movies about people who want to remain anonymous and unnoticed, the director sometimes deliberately places them off center, near the significant edges of the screen. So in this case, we see that she's not the protagonist, but she's in this situation of unknown, and it's building tension. It's on the edge of the frame. So another thing that directors do is that they utilize symmetry or asymmetry. And of course, when we talk about symmetry, if we think about like, um, think about this line, right? When something is symmetrical, there's an equal side to it. So, such as this case, right? There's an equal side. The right side is equal to the left. In this case, too. The left and right are equal. We split it down the middle. Same thing here. Same amount of people. The colors are correspondent here. Red, red, right? So there's symmetry. There's symmetry here. The left side and the right side are equal. Now, when things are symmetrical, they're they're evoking harmony and stability, order, control. It's generally used when a director wants to stress stability and harmony, such as we see here. Now, interestingly, directors also choose to have asymmetry in their compositions, in their frames, in their shots, right? And this evokes a sense of off balance, uneven, can create tension, unease, instability. And here's a good example. So look at these two frames. If we were to split it down the middle, notice how these windows are long and rectangular versus these, right? These are squares. So the windows are not symmetrical. Additionally, the size of these two figures are different. So she looks closer to the frame, she looks bigger, he looks smaller. The colors are different. So there is asymmetry here. If we were to split this frame down the middle, notice how um, they're not equal, right? There's no correspondence. Like there's a lamp here, there's no lamp here. There's this white thing, there's a pink thing. So notice there's asymmetry, and the sense that it creates in us as viewers are things are off balance and uneven. So another thing that filmmakers do is called the dominant contrast. And what that does, what the dominant contrast does is that it directs our eyes to what matters most. And that could be done because of how something is contrasted or where it's placed. In this case, look, when we look at this, our eyes are instantly drawn to the girl right here in the center, right? Not only because of placement, but also because, the color here is white. There's a contrast. This is a darker area of the frame, but this is white and lighter, and it guides our eyes there. Our attention is drawn to this point, right? So it's the dominant place where the director wants us to look, right? The dominant contrast. And I think this is a good example. Something else that filmmakers do is called negative space. And basically, negative space is just the empty areas in the frame. And this can suggest a loneliness or isolation, room for growth or possibility, or emotional distance, or anticipation that something might enter that space. So, this is a good example from Stanley Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey. There's all this negative space showing the isolation in this instance, right? Um, so, this is a good example. Now, in conjunction with that, we talk about negative space, right? So what is absent from the frame, right? These empty areas in the frame. We have all this white space, right? This negative space. There's no subjects occupying this space. But the off-frame space is what is absent from the frame. And that can also be just as powerful because it creates a sense of surprise and anticipation, creates mystery, suspense, and it makes the audience it makes us as viewers have to fill in the gaps with our imagination. And I think this is a good example. So, from the movie the Maltese Falcon with Humphrey Bogart, Bogey, where the gun comes out off the frame, creates a sense of mystery, of surprise, of suspense. So that's something else that directors do is not only having negative space, empty areas, but also leaving things off. So it's not only about what you place in the scene, but also what you leave off can be used to create this sense of suspense and surprise, right? So as we're going to see our film, I want you to notice what's the dominant color palette. We're going to see Emily. Are colors saturated or desaturated? Now we've talked a little bit about what those are and what the emotional effect that it evokes is, right? Think about too, as the characters change and locations change, do the color schemes and change and how? Look about the framing choices. Where is Emily positioned in the frame at different moments? When is she at the center and at the edges? And how does the framing reflect her emotional state in that moment? So remember, film is a visual medium created through images. It's not just by the words that are said, but also how what colors are used, the framing, and these are intentional choices by the director. And as we watch these movies, as we watch these films, as film students, we're going to pay attention to what the directors do and what that signifies. So I hope that you enjoyed these topics as much as I did. Thank you for watching.